Hello, I'm Dr. Katie Stofer. I'm from the University of Florida, where I'm a research assistant professor and IFAS extension specialist in the area of STEM education and outreach. And STEM, of course, is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I'm in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication. And today I want to talk to you about my research and practice within this area of public engagement with science. So first off, I want to tell you a little bit about my background because you may not be aware of this as an academic discipline in an area of study, or even really an area of practice. So I've started out and continued throughout my career really combining research and practice in more and more formal and better integrated ways. So as an undergraduate, I actually studied neuroscience and participated also as in some scientific activities at things like museums where we would talk about the brain and talk to people during things like Brain Awareness Week. Then I went to a career as a science communicator, and during that time where I studied science journalism for my master's degree, I was also working at a museum, and as part of that, doing research on how people were thinking about things like scientific models and helping them develop exhibits on science. Then I went on actually to work in a museum again, so continuing as a practitioner in an exhibit about earth science news. I was also doing research on the visitors in that museum and what they wanted to learn about and how they would be interested in things when they came to visit a museum. And finally, I met my PhD advisor who said, you can do all of this in one degree. And so I went back and got a PhD in science education with a specific focus in these sort of contexts that are not your typical K-12 or college school classroom. And now at the University of Florida, as I said, I both do research and extension where I share my research work on this understanding of public engagement with science. I share that with other practitioners and with other scientific researchers who want to get involved in sharing their work. So I want to talk about all these elements of this idea that I call, and others call, public engagement with science. Let's start off with what science is. I really think we need to dig in and understand what we're talking about here. It's actually not that easy to find a definition of science, but I like this one from the North Carolina State University Office of Public Science, where it emphasizes that science is both a way of knowing and a way of investigating the world. So for example, it's not just the facts we know with this guy on the right and the stuff that's in our head that's just kind of, individual things that we think of as like, what is scientific accepted fact? But it's also, science is this actual process of investigating, of using tools like this magnifying glass to answer and ask questions about the world around us. So as we go forward, I want you to kind of think about, again, we're talking not just about public engagement with facts, but public engagement with the process of science as well. Okay, next, I'm going to step back and instead of talking to you about engagement, let's talk about education and communication, which were the degrees sort of in my background. So communication, again, hard to find a little bit of a definition. However, important things that communication is a process designed for transmitting information and common understanding. On the other hand, people say that education is the organized transfer of information designed to bring about learning, right? So communication is this transfer of information. Education is transfer to, and in both cases, you're trying to share some understanding. So communication is a process. Education is an organized communication, if you will. Again, we're starting to split hairs, but in reality, a lot of people come down sort of on one side or the other, and it kind of shapes your thinking about these things. But I think you can't learn without communicating, and the whole point of communicating is learning or sharing that understanding. Now, let's dig into this even more. Again, back to this idea of knowledge versus the process of science. Both education and communication have traditionally focused on learning as equivalent to knowledge, okay? Sharing that understanding of the way the world works as we know it. Sharing scientific facts, right? Sharing our best practices for taking care of your health. But more recently, both of them are starting to investigate a much broader array of ideas that are related to this idea of promoting learning. They can be cognitive aspects, such as, certainly these scientific concepts, and it can include, though, these practices and skills that are more akin to the process of science. Sometimes this is also lumped under the idea of knowledge and awareness. So either cognitive aspects, knowledge and awareness, maybe other terms that you've heard. The newer things are things like affective dimensions of learning. So what are people's attitudes? What are their interests? Are people afraid of science? Do they trust scientists? All of those fall under this affective idea. And then finally, behavioral. What changes in their activities and actions do people really make after participating in science communication or science education or any of these kinds of activities that we're, going to be talking about today? And again, these, as I said, have been socially separate, especially academically. We have different journals, we have different conferences, and any of you that have worked or tried to work with people in different departments may have run into these same sorts of things. People are doing work that could be related, but they're putting them in places that not everybody from other disciplines may be seeing. So even here at the University of Florida, we have three very separate places where this sort of idea of communication and education are happening. We have a College of Education, which has science education as part of it. We have a College of Journalism and Communications, which has actually STEM translational research and education going on there. And then my department, Agricultural Education and Communication, within the College of Agriculture. And we are the only ones in AEC and in our College of Agriculture that are doing the work of extension at the university. And if you can think about it, three separate colleges within this gigantic University of Florida where people are doing work that's probably informing all of the rest of us, but we're not always meeting together. What does that mean? That means we may have different stated goals. We may have different audiences, settings for our research and our activities of engagement, and also methods. So we may have, again, complementary ideas that we could be sharing. We also may operate under different theories of how things are happening. So, for example, education works on theories of how people think, kind of going back to the days of neuroscience, but also including ideas about our social and cultural surroundings and environment. And then communication might look more at something like a theory of exchange. What are people expecting from an interaction with a scientist, with a science communicator, with a science educator, right? So again, we're kind of speaking the same language, going at it at a different angle. I think ultimately these are two sides of the same coin, and we should be talking together more. So communicators, again, want to exchange information in order to facilitate learning and behavior change. Educators want to facilitate change in knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, but they have to do so by exchanging information. So kind of looking at the same thing, but really overall it's a system, and we want to be ultimately looking at it holistically and in less specific chunks, but as a bigger whole. So now let's turn to this idea of what we mean about science education or communication in public. So remember, the phrase that I use is public engagement with science. So think about some of the words and phrases that you might have had come to your mind in terms of the activities you've been working on, in terms of describing your activities to share your work with broader audiences. Is it science education? Is it communication? So specifically when you're working outside of K-12 and even college classrooms. Why do you think those might be good descriptions of what you do, or why might they be problematic? I want you to take a few moments, take a few minutes, post your thoughts on the discussion forum if you're participating in this course in that way, or share your thoughts with some of your colleagues who are around, or simply make some notes for yourself. Stop the video, take a few minutes, restart, and we'll come back to this idea.